We often separate sexuality from like the emotional parts of our life, but especially for women, our hearts and our sexuality are so connected. And so if there's something in the way, if there's resistance in the emotional body, if there's resistance in the heart, if there's a backup of emotions that haven't been processed, any old resentments, it'll be very, very hard to be sexually open in your relationship.
Hello and welcome. Today I have Kiana Reeves. She is a somatic sex educator, a certified sexological body worker, a pelvic health practitioner, a certified doula, and Foria's chief education officer. Kiana, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It's really great. I love everything you're doing. I love watching you. I love the way that you present things. So I'm super excited to have you
Thank
here.
you.
Let's start with jumping right in. Sexual medicine is often, it's all about the dysfunction. We talk about like male sexual dysfunction, female sexual dysfunction, and your work is very different. And I love the approach. How can we shift the conversation to be more pleasure focused and less about all the dysfunctions and more about the fun stuff?
It's such an important conversation because, it's reflective of Western medicine, which is very problem focused, and it's not typically an integrative or holistic perspective on the whole human. And so the reason that sexual medicine as a whole, I think, focuses on dysfunction is because Western medicine is almost always like looking towards the thing that's wrong, and we're not really looking at the quality of life. And when you look at statistics, like one of the reason people get divorced the most, one of the most common challenges in relationships, whether they're long-term monogamous relationships or poly relationships or, partners that you just met and you recently started dating is around sexual satisfaction, sexual connection, and deepening in pleasure together, keeping the spark alive. All of these things that really gear not around dysfunction, while that has a place and needs solutions, but it's really geared towards like, what's the quality of our experience? Because you could have absolutely no dysfunction and still have like a mediocre time sexually.
Right.
And so there's this whole world of exploration sexually that focuses on pleasure, that focuses on connection, that focuses on embodiment. And the world of somatics is a great place to start that exploration because it is very much body-based and pleasure-based.
Let's talk about that because one of the things that as I started to do this work, I started to learn, I at one point I did an episode about like the difference between a sex therapist, a sex counselor, a sex coach. And I think a lot of people think, if you're going to anyone with the word sex in front of their title, then they must be touching you
Yeah,
somehow. And you
right.
actually do somatic work is in fact that. So talk about what that is and how
Yeah.
it's used, et cetera.
Yeah, so not all people trained in somatics will touch you. The certification I was trained in, sexological bodywork, is hands-on anatomical mapping of the genitals, of the body, of sexual pleasure. And it's a really cool and unique modality that has specific hands-on training. Somatics in general is it's a way to engage with the body that's based through the senses. And so you're using somatics like being able to track sensation, being able to really feel what's happening in your body, listen to what's happening in your body. And with those tools like breath and with touch and with really like mapping physically, anatomically, what's happening in you, you get this whole world of information unveiled to you that is not, prescribed by someone outside of you. It's not externalized information. It's resourced directly from your own personal experience. So it's very empowering and it's very unique to you. And because of that, it becomes very powerful and potent in intimate experiences because it relates to the body.
So how do you start with one person? Do you start with a couple? How?
There's so many ways to do it. And not every, if there was like, let's say a somatic sex education session, I've done individually, I've done them with couples, I've done hands-on intravaginal work, and all of them can be very different. The core of it, though, is defining what you're wanting, defining where you're wanting to expand, defining what is bringing up challenge, where you feel blocked, where you feel disconnected in your life, and then coming up with a roadmap together about the ways you can start exploring and connecting with your body in a way that A, centers safety, and B, centers pleasure. Those are the two core factors in this work that are consistent.
Is it always sexually related? Is it always?
No, not at all. Yeah. I mean, there's the whole world of somatics, in large part is not sexual, but the world of somatic sexological body work and somatic sexology is focused on the direct experience the body's having.
So why, what would bring me to someone like you?
To someone like me, so right now I do more coaching. I don't do the hands-on work I used to do because it was very one-on-one intensive. But let's say the reason clients come to me is because they know, and often my clients are women or couples, but they know this part of their life is important to them. They don't know how to start exploring it. And often traditional therapy hasn't worked. They've been able to talk about their problems, but the issues haven't really resolved in the body. Or, for example, someone coming with a low libido and or like a chronic concern inside of their relationship around their sex life. Couples come to me for those reasons as well.
And so how does, and I want to hear about the coaching as well, but like, how would you introduce, like, how does it work? Like, I know how therapy works and,
Yeah.
how does it make you feel, all that stuff, but like, how does it actually?
It's so unique to each person and what you're wanting. But foundationally, we're using tools of embodiment, so breath, sound, and movement to start to notice what's happening in the body, where there's numbness, where there's a lot of sensation, where there's emotion. And the the heart of my work is really centered around the nervous system and being able to track that because our nervous system is like basically the doorway of our perception of our entire lives. And so we start to build this baseline understanding and relationship with what the body's communicating. And at the same time, we'll probably be doing exercises like examining what we desire, right? What do we actually desire in our partnerships and in our sexual moments? And I'll see this a lot with couples where they come in and they're like, we have mismatched libidos and we can't really like connect. We're having a hard time connecting. We're having a hard time really like finding that amazing place together, even though we know it's possible. And often it'll be because one person has a certain set of desires, the other person has a different set of desires, and they're both trying to meet in the middle. So no one's desire is actually getting met. Or they've just never talked about it before and they don't know how to articulate what their desire feels like. A lot of times when we focus on desire, we're focusing on like something like, well, I want to be spanked, or I want to be choked, or I want to be dominated. And we have very limited descriptive capacity for it. Or I want, like, I'm thinking about what I've heard a lot of men say, wanting to be seduced or wanting to be teased. And those are words that have actual embodied, like there's an actual embodied quality of being able to seduce or being able to bring tease energy to a partner. And if we've never tried that before, we've never explored that before, it's going to be really hard to access and gift that inside of our relationship. Same as like a partner who's asking to be dominated or asking to have a little bit of a rougher, more energetic, activating experience. If you've never practiced that together, you can ask for it as much as you want, but your partner might not have the capacity in their bodies. They might not have the practice to be able to bring you those energies. And so a lot of what we'll do is practice bringing in certain energies, track what's happening in the body, track the sensation, and then, use sessions as a way to practice some of these things and then negotiate the whole time. Negotiate, oh, that feels good. Or, giving feedback on, I loved when you reached for me this way, but when you squeeze too hard or something. And so it's actual embodied practice. It's the body getting to learn how to bring new things into a sexual relationship.
Do you find differences in how men and how women approach this when you're looking at couples?
Do you mean like in typically like what they desire or how comfortable they are or
Yeah, like I feel we're as women, we're more in touch with our bodies. We give birth.
yeah,
There's a
exactly.
lot.
Yeah,
Men
yeah,
are
yeah.
just like, well, I got a penis and I need to ejaculate, and like this is what rub me hard.
Yeah. I think it depends on the couple, and I think it depends on who initiated the conversation
Okay.
with me in my work, because a lot of the times the men are the ones coming saying like, hey, my partner doesn't desire sex and I like really don't know what to do. And they're trying to get in there and help support her or help support their partner.
And what about when you work one-on-one with women? How does that go if it's just coaching and it's not, or
Yeah, so that's again, it depends, but a lot of times my sessions are practice based. And so we'll really like dive into where they're blocked, where they're feeling stuck, where they shut down, what's chronically happening in their sexual relationships or in their relationships in general. We often separate sexuality from like the emotional parts of our life, but especially for women, our hearts and our sexuality are so connected. And so if there's something in the way, there's resistance in the emotional body, if there's resistance in the heart, if there's a backup of emotions that haven't been processed, any old resentments, it'll be very, very hard to be sexually open in your relationship. Very hard.
and how do you, I mean, I find I even had an experience this weekend where I can talk about sex on my podcast like no problem. And I'm better at asking for what I want and setting boundaries. But even still, like there was definitely a moment when I was like, okay, I'm just not even gonna bother like trying to communicate with
Yeah.
like let's just finish and be done because this is
Yeah.
not working the way I want it to work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for example, in that moment, and this is a really good example, that moment of shutdown or the moment of just like, this isn't working. Most people in that moment will either check out or try to get it over with or feel like it's just like, it just like falls apart, and that's actually the moment to lean in and communicate is that most painful, awkward moment where you're like, hey, like something's not working for me. I'm not sure what it is. Can we work together to find it? Can we go back to kissing or looking in each other's eyes and like feel it's the opportunity to feel into what's wanted in that moment. And sometimes, particularly when we're looking through the lens of the nervous system, for anyone who regularly goes into freeze response or towards freeze, there can be a delay in being able to track the signals in the body because as we go into freeze, we start to like dissociate a little bit. We start to get a little confused. We get a little slow. The cognitive capacity isn't like registering moment to moment information. And so that's the time, if you notice that happens to you, that's the time to really slow down and pause, start tracking your body again. And then from there, when you're resourced, you're able to go like, oh, actually what I need is to just slow down and connect and like feel more of your heart, feel more connected to you. But when we don't take the opportunity to bring spaciousness into the sexual experiences we're having, what often happens is closure, and then everything just kind of like feels weird and you don't know what to do with it.
The light bulb's kind of going off to just since I'm usually offering a little too much information. It's a new relationship. And
Mhm.
so I think that it's very hard when you first meet somebody that to try to actually have that communication.
Yeah.
Um, and so I like, how do you even if it's a one night stand and you want good sex, like
Yeah.
how do you communicate, or you just say like, that's not the goal here. The goal is like, let's just have sex and get out, whatever that means, and get
Yeah.
get on with it.
Yeah. Well, I I come from a different background in terms of thought around this because I know lots of people like enter into sex being cognitively able to think it's just sex. But it is actually a very deeply intimate experience that requires us to feel a baseline level of safety and a baseline level of connection. If we don't have those two things, there's going to be layers that are just performative or compartmentalized, let's say, where we're like, okay, we'll put connection aside. I'll put some of my needs aside, and I'll just be here for the pleasure. But again, we're compartmentalizing.
Right.
And so let's say I'm going to use myself as an example. As someone who has a very hard time having casual sex, but really enjoys sex, what I would need from someone, even if it was just one night, is I would actually need very, very deep connection. And I would have a need to be able to honor all of my needs in those intimate moments. So I might say to that person, like, hey, I know this might just be a one night, one glorious night. but I'd love for my heart to feel held the whole time. I'd love to feel your heart the whole time. I love to be really open in our communication, our expression, and all of our sexual needs, and kind of like set the stage so that that is something that's blossoming open as possibility. And I think what happens is, especially in those singular or short or non-committed sexual experiences we're having, is that we're bifurcating. We're kind of like bifurcating and putting needs off in one direction. And then I'm trying to think how to say this in a way that makes sense. Um, we always have needs, no matter what. And a lot of times in the shorter, more sexually focused experiences, we're not actually honoring or even noticing that we have needs to attend to because we are able to analyze them as like, they're not actually going to meet my long-term needs. They're not actually going to meet this kind of need. So we push it to the side. And this would be an entire renegotiation of that, saying, actually, I know this is going to be short, but here's all my needs on the table, you know? And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of like the reframe that I would give it.
I think what it brings it sort of it around to what you said in the beginning is that I also find it very hard to just meet somebody and I mean, I don't find it hard to get into bed. I find it hard
Yeah.
not to want something more deep.
Yeah.
And I think it's being able when you're very physically attracted to somebody, certainly in the beginning, because I'm
Yeah.
dating now, I'm single, and it's very hard to resist.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm hearing is that without being, if you're not comfortable enough having that conversation, I want to have this as a more embodied experience, then it's not going to be the experience you want. It's
Yeah.
what a superficial or a less than exciting
Yeah.
experience.
Well, I think you touched on something like often you want more. Often we want more, but we're saying like, okay, well, this isn't going to be the more, so I'm just going to like settle and like not honor that part of my heart, which again kind of cuts you off emotionally from what's true from the actual physical experience that's happening. You kind of have to like sequester a little bit of your desires. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can actually like I've had experiences where I was very, very clear I wasn't going to be with that person, very clear, and that it was sexual, but that it was very connected during that moment. And how cool would it be if we went into those situations instead of trying like to defend the intimacy, instead of trying to like protect against it feeling intimate so that it didn't develop into something else, which I think is a lot of times what happened, right? We're going into something being like, okay, this is going to be short. So like, I'm not going to feel love or I'm not going to feel wanting of this person. I'm not going to like open those parts of me up. And the other person's like, well, yeah, this is just this. So we don't even get to experience the juiciest, most wonderful part of sex, which is actually union and connection. So for me, I think about this. I'm like, how cool would it be if you meet someone, you're like, yeah, I want to have a one night stand. I'm not in the space for a relationship. I don't even want to date. But this person, I see something in them that's like so attractive to me, so lovable, so fucking interesting that I want to let them enter the most intimate part of my life and my expression, whether that's my body or I'm entering their body. And in that space, even if it's just 12 hours, 2 hours, 24 hours, whatever it is, we go all the way in and we find and we create love and we honor, the unique, beautiful parts of each other. That way, like the whole thing again is holistically alive. And yeah, it may fucking hurt the next day. It may hurt to be like, oh, like I'm not gonna experience that again. But that's what's true. And when we cut off the other parts, it's just not as beautiful and it's not as fulfilling, in my opinion.
No, I think that's great, and I think of just my own psyche. Like I want that, but I see that as something as part of something bigger in a relationship.
Yeah.
And I know me, I have an anxious attachment style. If that
Yeah.
happened and it was just a one night stand, I would be very upset
Totally. Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
So
Well, that in a way is like caring for our hearts. And this is where I think I find challenge with some of like our narrative around like what sexual freedom is. It's like, yeah, you can screw anyone, whoever you want, whenever you want. And I honestly question whether we jump into bed too fast with people. And it's not a judgment because I've certainly done it and had amazing time, but whether we're honoring our emotional needs in those experiences is really something I think about a lot because it is a deep, intimate, emotional experience to have sex with someone and to pretend like it's not like it doesn't add up to me.
I think the people that can do it, and I remember meeting someone a couple months ago that had lost her partner, who she divorced and found this like amazing person, and he dropped dead.
Yeah.
And all she wanted was to like meet people, and even if she
Yeah.
was in a relationship, she's disassociated. That she just
Yeah.
wanted the sex, and she'd walk away because she couldn't. So it was
Totally.
easy enough for her to have the sex, but the emotional part was just disconnected. And I wonder how good
Yeah.
the sex was too,
Yeah.
right? If you're really not emotionally connected. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to take a quick break to ask you, if you're enjoying the show, why not hit the subscribe button? That makes sure that you're notified every time a new episode comes out and when the bonus episodes come out. And if you really want, you can head over to my website and pick up a copy of Your Pleasure Playbook. Now, let's get back to the show.
Do you think it's different from between men and women?
I think it is. I think women, we bond through oxytocin, and oxytocin's released during orgasm and pleasure. And so, yeah, if we're having extremely pleasurable sex with someone, we're getting coated. I mean, just coated with oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. And it's gonna make you want to connect more with them.
And men don't have that?
I don't think that they have the same. I think theirs is the dopamine pathway. So their dopamine, I believe this could be wrong, but I believe their dopamine is released more in the seeking of versus the release.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Mhm.
I think I heard something that our happy hormones, whichever ones they all are, the oxytocin, tend to stay high after sex, where men, it like once the sex, it tends to go down, which is
Yeah.
why they're less bonded
Yeah.
to the experience.
Yeah.
And they don't
Yeah.
why
And
they ghost.
I'm not sure they're releasing oxytocin or as much oxytocin as we are.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just happy hormone.
Yeah.
Whichever one it is, it makes you
Yeah.
feel good in the moment. All right. So let's move to couples that are in long-term relationships. We talked a little bit about low libido, but I've been in a relationship married to the same guy for 20 years. Love the guy, but I could care less about sex.
Yeah.
Whether the hormone stuff we might want to talk about, but let's say everything's functioning and we just don't have sex anymore. What are some tips, some things that we can do to start to really reconnect?
So the number one thing that I would look at is, do you like the sex you're having? And this is a great question by Emily Nagoski in her Come Together book. And it just frames it up so perfectly. Why would you want to have sex if you don't like the sex that you're having or that you've been having for 20 years? And I would layer on top of that, not only do you like the sex, but do you feel excited or inspired by it? Because even if you like something, if it becomes pretty habitual and you can predict how it's going to be, it's not going to be something that you actively crave or want necessarily. And so that has to be then the opening point of discussion between the couple who's experiencing that. Saying like being able to write down a list of, here's all of the things that I love about our sex. And here's really where I'm wanting to explore and what I would love more of. And it's it's amazing how many couples never have that conversation. Or they try to have the conversation and it's, I love the sex toy industry and I love the sexual wellness industry, but the solution is not in necessarily a new toy or handcuffs. Those can be assists, but really what you're craving is a different type of energetic experience, a different type of emotional experience, a different way to connect with your partner that will bring you somewhere new. And you start with that conversation. And then I believe that it's very challenging for couples to explore that on their own because it's basically the blind leading the blind. It's like your 20 years of sexual habits paired with my 20 years of sexual habits, plus our teenage years probably of like no sex education, like you're not going to get very far, so working with a teacher or working with someone who leads really wonderful workshops for couples to explore different parts of their sexual expression would be the place that I send people, because reading books is awesome and you will get knowledge, but you will not get embodied experience. And embodied experience is really like sex is an embodied thing.
Right.
And you have to be able to find new places in your expression and in your body if you want to connect in new ways. And that can be really hard to do at home alone, just the two of you. And it can also be really intimidating because there's no structure to it. There's no like third in the room saying like, okay, like let's try this. There's no instructor.
What about for the couple who hasn't had, who just sort of sex kind of waned when they had the kids and then they just stopped having sex?
Yeah, it's
like,
hard.
okay, kids are leaving and now what am I going to do? Like we
Yeah,
can't
like
just,
they stopped having sex altogether.
yeah.
Oh man, I would just say like start kissing again. Like start like sex can become such a pressure and it starts to snowball. Like you stop having sex, you haven't had sex in like 2 months and then it's 6 months and it's a year and then you have no way to like get back to sex itself. But the next step towards that would be connection. And connection is sometimes as easy as like looking in each other's eyes and saying a sentence or less about how you're feeling, hugging, holding each other. My husband and I right now are in a really stressful time, and stress will send your libido into the grave, and it does that. Like for me, stress puts my libido, it goes bye-bye. And I don't know when it's going to come back. It'll come back in like these little bursts. But to know that we can create and find intimacy when things are like so high level stress that we just know we're like not going to be having a great sex life. We massaged each other. We were like laying naked and it was so beautiful and so nourishing and no pressure. And guess what? That's the thing that brings your libido back.
Right.
Like that was the moment where I was like, oh yeah, I'd actually do really like this, is when there's no pressure. So you have to take the pressure off and just like date again. Like, what did most people when they first started dating, they like made out, they went on dates, they did fun stuff together. There's bonding happens in new experiences. And so focus on connection and creating new experiences and baby steps back
Yeah.
towards.
Yeah, I agree. I like John Gottman's 6-second kiss and 20-second hug.
Yeah.
I just gave somebody I have this new dentist and she was complaining. Everyone, I'm sure it happens to you too. You meet someone new, you tell them what you do, and all of a sudden they tell you about their sex
Whole
life.
sex life.
I don't like my husband.
Yeah.
We don't fight. So I'm like, okay, well, next time I see you, I want you to try a 6-second kiss and a 20-second hug. Doesn't take any energy, and
Yeah.
it will just start the process again.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
So important.
Well, and then what's funny too is, and I was thinking about this because we're in this really hard moment, just out, my husband and I, just on the outside, like there's a lot of circumstantial stuff that's just creating so much stress. And what's funny is that when we're in long-term relationship and we have so much shared responsibility and so much to-dos together, we hold in our psyche and the way we're relating to our partner, we hold them in the same structure as our early childhood dynamics with our family, right? So they're like in the position, not just of partner, but of caretaker and of, mom and dad and like all of the needs that didn't get met when we were kids come up inside of long-term committed partnership. And all of our habitual ways of reacting, all of our habitual ways of responding, all of our stress mechanisms, like that gets projected directly onto our partner. And often what that means is we make them the enemy because they're the only other person in the room sharing all of this pain with us. And so it's like, well, I'm not getting my needs met, which is your problem. And then they're doing the same thing. Well, I'm not getting my needs met, which is your problem. And we turn our partnerships into this tug of war of needs where they eventually like we put them in the position not of enemy, but of like they're the antagonist. And it's really hard to find nourishment when the relationship is like a tug of war of needs, And so just knowing that and starting to recognize when that's happening can be so liberating for connection, where you can really go like, oh yeah, I was doing that, blaming them for a bunch of shit that absolutely wasn't their fault.
Yeah, I think you have to really get in touch with it yourself to be able to.
Definitely.
Which awareness is the first part of solving
Definitely.
the problem.
Yeah.
It's very hard. It's very hard, and it's so sad to me when I hear couples. I mean, especially women who are like, yeah, store's closed, not interested anymore. Like, no hormones, no nothing. It's
I
like
know,
I
so
don't even care if he has another partner, and I think it's not just about the sex too. I think like what is the Peggy Kleinplaut's like, people who have good sex have good relationships and vice versa.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it really,
exactly.
it's sort of a core
Yeah.
need of any relationship to be enjoyable, whether success, whatever success means to you, but to be happy or content.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that when we talk about feeling connected to someone, we'll often say like, yeah, we're really close, and sex is like the closest you can be physically with someone. And that connection is not lost on me. The fact that to feel close literally means like physical proximity, but also emotional intimacy. And that when you have an emotional closeness, your physical closeness is going to be so much more available.
Wow, that's really beautiful. And it's so true. It's so true. We forget. Yes. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Anything you want to add? And then I would love to hear just quickly, your story was a really beautiful one. A lot of people have kind of a linear progress to where they become whatever their vocation is. But I thought your story was really something special and a story of empowerment for a lot of women. So I would just love you to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been interested in sex and I think actually I'd always been interested in love. That was really at the heart of, and sex to me is the place where love is made real through the body. It's the place where we feel it most alive in our intimate relationships. And so my whole life I was drawn to like love, such a romantic, like had my first crush when I was 5 years old and, loved him. Loved him. First love when I was in sixth grade lasted for a decade. And so when I came into this particular part of my career as a sex educator, I had just had a son and I was a single mama and I wanted love. And I basically was like, who's going to love me with this? Like I am now so much more responsibility than I was. Like, and it fucking guts me because that's a lot of the way we kind of subconsciously see mothers who have kids already is this almost like this liability or this like burden. And I remember feeling some of that being projected onto me about how much more difficult it was going to be to find a partner and, what man was going to like want me when he could find someone who'd never had a kid before and who had freedom. And so it was from that place that I really started discovering and exploring sexuality and love. And so I studied with Kimberly Ann Johnson, who wrote the book Call of the Wild, which is such an important book on the female nervous system. Ellen Heed and Deej and Uma from the Institute of Somatic Sexology, and really stepped into this world of like figuring it out for myself. It's really what it was. And then for the last 5 years with my teacher, John Wineland. And all of it has been in this quest for what makes relationships worth having and worth staying in. And a large part of that is our sexual aliveness and our fulfillment and the connection that we can have there. And yeah, the story is different every time I tell it, but coming through the first many, many, many years of motherhood as a single mother was the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. And also the thing that it was like standing in the fire and discovering who I was and what I was capable of.
I think and looking back now at how you're like, how did I do that? Right.
Oh God. But how did I do that is like, it's a miracle.
But we are amazing. And how did you meet your husband now?
I met him after like a year-long hiatus from dating. I had been on a dating cleanse for 8 months, like no flirting, no looking at anyone, like nothing. And yeah, it was so good. It was like I learned how much of my energy I was sourcing from external attention and how much of my life felt worth living based on, whether I was in a relationship or not. And so it was this part where I really got to like dive into my life and what made it feel totally alive without partnership at all. And I think I dated for like 2 or 3 months, a few different like really funny dating stories where I was like, I'm gonna date whoever, and I opened my Hinge dating age range from like 20 to 60 or something. And I was like, I'm just gonna go have fun. And a few months after dating, he walked in to my birthday party on the beach. And I, like the instant I saw him, I was like, who is that man? And I walked up and yeah, we've been together ever since.
So you really believe in that whole, I mean, like I've been on this quest and I'm like, okay, I don't need a man. I don't need a man. And I really don't, but I want one.
Yeah, well,
It's
what a great place to be, right? You love
right.
your life. You love your life. And what an addition, what an additive it would be from that place to enjoy sharing it with someone. And there, we're such an individualistic society. We're like, yeah, I can do all of this alone, you know? And the truth is I could do all of this alone that I'm doing. I'm very successful. I'm very inspired by what I do. I got to hang on a lot of it, but I enjoy it so much more in partnership. And we're not really like meant to do any part of life solo. We're not meant to be these little like creatures living alone inside of a house and going to a job and sitting in front of a computer all day. It's the antithesis of our biology. And so, yeah, I do for me, whenever I've met someone that was going to be a significant partnership in my life, I've known the instant I saw them, even like from a photo when I hadn't met them yet. I saw it and I was like, oh boy, I see that one coming. That was my second son's dad as I saw a picture of him. And I was like, I knew I was about to meet him. And I was like, okay, all right, here we go. Someone big coming in. But I don't think they all happen that way. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with Foria?
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
briefly?
Yeah, so I've been with Foria, which is a really incredible sexual wellness brand for the last 7 years. I'm one of the original team members. And what I love is the brand has really centered the female experience throughout everything we've built. And so from our focus to sexual pleasure, which really like if you do have any experience around discomfort, or if you do have any experience around desiring more pleasure, more access to your arousal, like we have a line that's devoted and dedicated and works for the female body. And that's our intimacy line. And from there, we've expanded to support all other parts of the intimate life of the female. So menstruation, menstrual cramps, PMS, we have an amazing line for that. And then menopause as well. And so to me, like I've loved being part of the brand and the company because we get to center and focus on things that historically just haven't been seen as important or prioritized in Western medicine, but also just in Western culture. And we get to change the narrative. We get to talk about the stuff that, has no one's been willing to talk about.
Right. Yeah. And I'll put a link in the show notes to the
Awesome.
product. So that
Yeah.
will be great. Last question I ask all my guests, and I can't wait to hear what you say because you've talked a lot about it, but what is your definition of sex?
Oh,
I knew that's a big one for you. Some people are like pretty clear.
I'll tell you what, it has nothing to do with physical penetration. For me, sex is when I feel like wildly opened by either myself or another person. And so it does have this quality of like the body just like fucking opening and being in full expression and being in full pleasure and being in like full connection. But it has nothing to do with like the physical act. I think for me at the core, it's connection and like deep expression and union. And I say this because particularly the physical penetration piece, one, because I'm a queer woman and a lot of my relationships have been with women and a lot of the greatest sex has not been from penetration of any kind. But secondly, because in the last 6 years in studying in this tantric lineage of sexual polarity, I've had some of the most profound sexual experiences of my life with my clothes completely on and no physical penetration, and being able to have like huge waves of orgasmic energy from not even being touched. And so, and sometimes from being touched in totally different parts of the body that, I didn't even know were possible. So, yeah, to me, sex and like if I rounded that out, like sexual fulfillment is the feeling of feeling completely open, completely free, completely connected, and fully expressed. It's like that big exhale, where you're like, oh, like that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want what you're having.
Yeah.
We got to figure this out. This was great. This was great. Thank you
so
so
fun.
much. It's so lovely meeting you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciated the conversation.
All right.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, follow, and review the podcast wherever you listen. And go ahead and share it with a friend or a partner and make the world a more sex-positive place.